what franchises may be a good fit for you and the process of buying a franchise. So I have a short presentation, but feel free to ask as many questions along the way, and we'll get those answered as quickly as possible. I'm Eric Stites. I'm the founder and CEO of Franchise Business Review. Most of you know Franchise Business Review, which is how you found this webinar today. But for those that may not, we do franchisee satisfaction research across the industry. So what that means is that we're kind of the consumer reports of the franchise world. There's over 3,500 franchise companies operating in the US alone, and more internationally. And we actually survey the individual franchise owners, the franchisees, to find out how satisfied they are with their brand and their franchisor and the support that they're receiving. And then publish awards lists for those brands that have the highest satisfaction in the industry, and help prospective entrepreneurs like yourselves understand, what are the best opportunities based on actual franchise experience, not, not what's the hottest, trendiest, or the newest franchise concept out there. So that's a little bit about us. Share a lot more detail along the way. But the core to what we do is all about the franchisee experience. And I'll say it over and over and over again, is that's going to be your resource when you go through this whole process of exploring franchising, is talking to franchisees and kind of understanding what their experience has been, both the good, the bad, the ugly. Business is messy. That's the reality, but there's great brands out there that do an awesome job of supporting their franchise owners and building a national brand and bringing their franchisees along for that ride. And there's a lot of brands that, quite frankly, don't do a great job, and their franchisees aren't that successful. So we're here to kind of help point out some of those red flags and, about the process and how to do your due diligence. But you'll hear me say over and over and over again today, talk to franchise owners, go out, visit franchise owners in their businesses, call them up on the phone, and as many franchisees that you can talk to will just help mold your experience and knowledge, whether franchising is kind of the right fit for you. I'll also put the caveat on that I am very pro franchising. I think franchising is a great business model for many people. It's not a silver bullet to success. Every franchise owner that I know that's successful works really, really hard in their business. But if you do follow the system and work hard, and you're with a good brand, and you have that training and support behind you, it is a much simpler path to success. I won't say easier, because you still work very hard. And some of you may listen to this presentation today and be like, yeah, this isn't the right fit for me. And that's fine, because we want people coming into franchising with their eyes wide open and understanding what business ownership and franchise ownership is all about. Because again, there's, business ownership isn't easy. People often ask me what business is hot, what am I gonna, make millions and millions of dollars at? And, you can make millions and millions of dollars in franchising, but it takes many years of hard work, and, a lot of kind of skill and hard work on your own part, not just, what brand you kind of hitch your wagon to. So we'll talk a lot about that this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Just any questions along the way that come up, there's a Q&A box. Just pop them in there and we'll get to as many as we can. And let's make this as interactive as possible. So with that, basically, this process of business ownership, I've kind of broken down into 5 key steps. And you're here today kind of at that first step, which is exploration, and a little bit of second step of education. And then we get into kind of deeper research into different business opportunities and franchises, and then kind of a planning phase. And then ultimately is that decision day of, is this the path for me? And if so, what are those next steps? So those are kind of the 5 big steps. Obviously, there's a lot of pieces in there, and we're going to quickly kind of go through those today. And again, any questions, feel free to shout out and ask along the way. So in this explore process, what I always tell people is really, start with the why. Why are you here on this webinar today? Why are you interested in business ownership and franchising? What is it that's driving you to this exploration process? And, and really do that kind of deep introspective look at yourself as to, what is it? Maybe you've always dreamt about owning your own business. Maybe you hate your job and you want something else to do. Maybe, somebody that's a franchise owner and you want to kind of follow in their footsteps. There's a lot of reasons, but really doing that kind of self introspection and understanding, what's driving you to this. What are your goals? What's your vision for business ownership? Some people want to buy a business and, in a few years, flip it and sell it. Others want to buy something and own it for 15, 20 years, or some people might be looking to kind of supplement their retirement with part-time business ownership. There's a lot of different kind of pathways that franchising can address. And it's really important to do that kind of self-introspection and understand, what is it that you're looking for and what are your goals and your vision. And we have a great tool to kind of help with this. It's called our Vision Planning Workbook. And everybody that's on the webinar today will get a copy of that in a follow-up email. And, basically it just kind of walks through a number of areas to help you kind of think through, what am I looking for? What kind of business do I want to own? What can I afford? And, what kind of lifestyle do I need or do I want to have? And how is the business going to meet those goals? So lots of questions. And I encourage you to take your time and really think through that. And that will really help as you begin to talk to franchisees and franchisors. They want to, understand where you're coming from and what your goals are. And, having kind of done that in advance and have a clear understanding of what you're looking for will just help them determine if you're the right fit or not for their franchise brand. The other thing that I always tell people is, at this stage, some of you may have been looking for a while, some of you may have just started, but I always encourage people to just keep their eyes wide open and take the blinders off, because there's so many different business models and so many different industries across the franchise sector. And the vast majority of folks that get into franchising end up buying into a brand that was far outside of what they initially started looking at. So, lots of people are drawn to franchising because of food. They see all these brands on the highway every day, and then they realize, oh, food's not a great fit. But there's lots and lots of different industries and different business models. There's part-time models. There's owner operator models. There's absentee owner models for, kind of executives to keep your day job and run a business. So there's lots of different opportunities. And again, it really goes back to, what are your goals? What are you looking for? What are your skills? What are your weaknesses, and how will that affect business ownership? So, again, keep your eyes wide open, kick a lot of tires, and talk to as many franchisees and franchisors as you can to kind of get a sense of, what business opportunities are out there, because there's lots and lots and lots of them. The other thing I'll add too is, again, there's lots and lots of well-known brands, the Subways, the Wendy's, you name it. Planet Fitness, some of the bigger brands that everybody knows about. But there's a lot more brands that are more smaller regional brands that, aren't necessarily startup brands. They've been around for a while, but you may not have heard of them if they're not, right in your backyard. So again, that's an area to keep your eyes and ears wide open as to, what are some of the opportunities in franchising that I may not be aware of. It may be a senior care business. It may be a cleaning business. It may be a child care business or a travel agency, or, you name it. There's whatever business model there is. I guarantee you, there's at least one franchise brand, if not many, operating out there today. And so this is where that exploration process is exciting to, really kind of see what's out there, and educate yourself about that, those opportunities, which leads me to that second step of education. And so, really looking at what resources are out there. Obviously, franchisebusinessreview.com, our website, where you've probably already been, and just some of the specific resources up in the top navigation of our website. There's a resource and insights drop down with articles and our franchise buyer guides, and lots and lots of franchisee profiles, which are great inspirational pieces to kind of share different stories about franchise owners, what they were doing prior to franchising, how they got into franchising, and the brand that they're associated with. We do lots of webinars like this, and then also lots of tips and advice. And then in the upper right-hand corner of our website, there's also what we call our Franchise Academy, which is just a good kind of step-by-step process similar to this that kind of walks you through all the pieces of buying a franchise and kind of educating you about that process. So that goes into a lot more detail than we will even today. Other resources, franchise.org, which is the International Franchise Association's website, has a lot of great resources. Franchise Times and franchising.com are two big media companies in the franchise space, which have a lot of resources on their website. They also both have print magazines. Franchising.com has a multi-unit franchise magazine. If so, anybody that's interested in owning multiple franchise locations, that's a great resource as well. And then the SBA website, which is sba.gov, Small Business Administration, has a great business guide and learning center for small business. It's not franchise specific, but they have lots of great resources for business ownership. So I would definitely, have you check those out. Also, two great books that I always recommend. The Wealthy Franchisee came out a couple of years ago, written by Scott Greenberg, who's a friend of mine, a multi-unit franchisee out in California. He's since gotten out of the business, but he shares a lot of his learnings in his book, and what it takes to be a successful operator. He bought two existing franchise locations and turned them around and became one of the more successful franchisees in his system, which was a very large system. So he's walked the talk. So great book. I always recommend that. And then The Educated Franchisee is another great book. Rick Bizio is the author. He's been in the franchise world for a long time. He's a franchise broker. So he assists people in the franchise buying process as well, if you're interested in that. But his Educated Franchisee book, and the workbook that kind of goes along with it, is a great resource to help kind of learn the language of franchising and kind of, guide you through that buying process. And then the other piece that I always tell people, some of you may have owned businesses before, many of you have not. So I just always recommend getting educated on financials, and getting comfortable. And you don't have to become an accountant or a CPA or, some financial guru, but just having a good basic understanding of small business financial statements, income statements, what a profit and loss statement looks like, how to read a balance sheet, and really be able to kind of understand how cash moves through a business. There's a lot of moving pieces, and cash is king, as you probably have heard. But it's really important as you start exploring different franchise opportunities to really understand, how their business model works, how exactly, what's the investment that you have to put in, how does that generate sales, how's the marketing work, what are all those various expense buckets, and hopefully if you're successful, what does that profitability piece look like? And, and the piece that a lot of people don't understand is, a business is very similar to buying a car. You can go out and buy a fancy car, you can buy, a more practical car, but no matter how much you spend on a car, you're going to have to continue to put, gas in it to fuel it, and you're going to have maintenance along the way. And a business is very much the same way. There's kind of that initial cost with a franchise business, and there's businesses for $10,000 and there's businesses for, $1 million plus. So there's lots of different options in there, but regardless of what that initial investment is, you're going to have to reinvest money into that business over time. So understanding, what does that look like? What is the, requirements to do so? If you own a gym, for instance, how often do you have to buy new equipment? And can that be leased? Do you have to buy new signage? Do you have to, obviously every business has to invest in marketing. So, really understanding all those expense items, and how that kind of generates additional sales and revenue. Because a lot of people think, they look at a quick P&L statement of a business and they see that, profit line, and they think that's their income. And the reality is that, as the owner of the business, your actual take-home income may be much less than that number, because you've got things like taxes and, like I said, reinvesting in the business, and most likely paying off some debt if you have a small business loan, and saving for retirement as well. So there's a lot of different factors that go into that. And, a good resource for this is going to a local community college and taking, basic small business accounting or finance class. There's lots of great resources online, so you can do searches online and just look for small business accounting or small business finance. Lots of free resources. I think even Khan Academy has some basic accounting courses as well. So again, just you don't have to be a finance genius, but having that good basic understanding will be very, very helpful and foundational to your success as a small business owner. So then after that kind of education process, really you start to get into the deeper research process. And so as this works, I mean, as I said earlier, you kind of, take the blinders off, and, you want to look around and kick the tires and explore lots of different opportunities. But, over time, you're going to kind of whittle that down to, probably 2 or 3 businesses that really interest you. And that's where, you want to do some deeper research into those businesses and due diligence to understand, what is this business all about? We talked about the financial piece, what's the cultural piece like? How is the relationship between corporate and the franchise community? What are the franchisees like? Are these the kind of people that you would like to hang out with? And I'll add to that is that, when you buy a franchise business, I think the greatest asset that you're buying is actually that community of franchise owners, because you can pick up the phone any day that you're in business and pick the brains of your fellow franchisees, and find out, whether it's a marketing question or an operations question or an employee question. You always have resources. Everybody always thinks about, got corporate, to provide resources, but that franchisee community is really where a lot of your resource and support is going to come from. And that's, huge to be able to think, if you open your own coffee shop, you're on your own. Like you don't, you might be able to pick some brains of other small business owners in the area. Most likely you're not going to pick the brains of a coffee shop owner because you're competitors. But in franchising, you've got this network of other people that are all doing the exact same business you're doing. So when you try something in marketing and maybe doesn't work like you thought, you can reach out to franchisees and find out, what their experience was and how they were successful, and, and reach out to the most successful franchisees in that system to find out, what are they doing differently to approach their business that's making them that successful. So again, it's often, very different skill sets, it's not about necessarily the product or the service that they're selling. Some businesses, a very strong sales and marketing skill set is important. Some, it's much more, an operational focus. So again, understanding, you've done that introspection, hopefully at this point, and you know where your strengths and weaknesses are. And when you talk to franchisees at different brands and understand, where they're kind of at and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and, do you fit into that model? I mean, certainly you can always hire to, backfill for your weaknesses. Like if you're not strong in sales and marketing, for instance, and you're more of an operations person, you can, hire that salesperson to go out and sell the product or service, and you kind of run things in the back of the house. But oftentimes as you're getting started, that's not, you don't have the money or the capital to, go out and hire a salesperson. So it's important to be able to understand, what are those pieces, and how are you going to, kind of fill those, areas that you may not be that strong in. And a franchisor, the franchise company will be, very transparent usually, and explain, how their system works, where their training and support really kind of kicks in, and what skills really make it, have to be unique to you to be successful. And so, again, talk to franchisors, talk to franchisees, and that's where you're going to hear a lot about, their actual experience. The next step in this process before you kind of get to that decision phase is really the planning phase. And so, at this point, you've narrowed it down to probably one or two different business options. And you kind of got to do some financial planning to figure out, like, what does this investment look like? And again, your goals may be very different. You might be in it for 5 years, you might be in it 10 years, you might be in it 20 years, or whatever. So it's important to have that plan. Plan is going to change, but it's important to kind of work through that exercise to understand, what does this opportunity look like long term? Because you have a lot of places you can invest your money, and you want to invest it wisely. So, if your return on investment is 10x at one brand and, only 5x at another brand, and they're, similar opportunities, or similar industries, obviously you'd want to, 10x your investment. So again, some careful planning and that financial education will come in handy. What I always caution people about is, franchise companies always like to talk about their best case scenario, best case, most successful franchisees. I mean, everybody loves to hear those inspirational stories, the person that, came from nothing and bought into a franchise brand and, worked their way up and had one store and now they own 50 stores. And, there's a lot of people that have gotten very, very wealthy in franchising, and those are great inspirational stories. But the reality is that that's not, the most likely case for everybody. So it's important to kind of understand, okay, I get that, the opportunity is there if I work hard and everything goes right. Yes, I hope to be, that's where I hope to be. But what does the experience of, the average person look like in this franchise system? And that's where you want to kind of do your planning around, when you start to kind of work through financial models and things like that, and figuring out, the big question of how much money can this business make over time, and what does that investment look like? And it's also important to kind of look at the worst case scenario. I mean, obviously the very worst case scenario is you go out of business, but, talk to franchisees that are less successful in different brands that you talk to, and find out, what is it that they're doing? I mean, just because a franchisee is not successful doesn't mean you won't be successful. But, if they're, understanding of the business is different than your understanding, or, maybe they had some other different life circumstance, maybe their market is different in some way. But it's important when you're talking to franchise owners and you stumble upon somebody and you will, that's not very successful. And, you may be positioning yourself as, well, I'm thinking about buying the business, and you might have a franchisee say, well, I'll sell you mine. It's important to kind of understand, why are they not successful? And is it something they're doing? Is it something the franchisor isn't providing them? Generally it's a combination of both, but, and again, everybody has different expectations for their business. So some people want to own, a single location, and they don't care about owning 10 or 20. And, in other systems, it's all, type A business owners that are, own 10 or 20 locations. And so again, that's where it's important to understand that cultural mindset and where you're comfortable fitting in. Because there's a lot of great brands out there, but they're not all great for you. And so really, again, talking to franchisees about their experience. The other piece I'll say about this is that, franchise companies are very good about disclosing, what their initial investment is. And it's presented in a range because obviously, every market is a little bit different, and you might have a bigger territory or a bigger location than, depending on where you are geographically. So, there'll be a range of, it costs $50,000 to $150,000, or, $500,000 to $750,000, or whatever that may be. And they'll kind of break out what the details of that initial investment include. The other thing that they're generally pretty good about disclosing is their average sales. So most systems these days will disclose their average sales. And all of this information is going to be in a document called the Franchise Disclosure Document, or FDD, specifically for their unit level, their franchise owned locations. This is going to be an item 19 of their FDD. And so you'll see a lot of numbers in there, and but generally most franchise companies these days will disclose their average sales. It may be a very small sample of their franchise owners. It may be the whole system. That's where you want to make sure that sample size, ideally you want it to be a sample size of the whole system. But not all franchise brands collect financial information from all their franchisees. So, again, read those very carefully and understand what is the sample size. And with the initial investment, the investment details are going to be broken out in item 5, 6, and 7 at the front of the franchise disclosure document, where it goes over, what's included in the franchise fee, things like royalties, what are the ongoing costs, advertising fee, maybe technology fees, those sorts of things. And then item 7 will break down kind of all of those initial costs. But where things get a little fuzzy is this little red bar here. And so if you've never owned a business before, some of you probably have, but the day you open your business, generally speaking, for some period of time, you're losing money. You're spending money on marketing. You've spent money to have employees. You've got all this, new product and inventory and whatever it may be. You've invested in equipment. So you've got these expenses, and the revenue isn't necessarily pouring in. So again, for some period of time, the business is losing money, and then hopefully it turns the corner pretty quickly and gets to a point of break even, and then ultimately over some period of time you'll hopefully at least get to average sales, or maybe if you're a top performer, you'll be above that. But that cycle, that curve is different in every business. It might take 3 months, it might take 3 years. So that's a really important piece of information to understand. And again, talk to, when you're talking to franchisors, ask them about this, and, obviously clearly understand the initial investment, but what is that capital need to kind of get through that initial curve of losing money before you get to break even, and then, positive cash flow. And then go out and talk to franchisees within that brand and confirm what the franchisor is telling you with them. And again, everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different. Some businesses take longer to ramp up, some, do it faster. Even within their own brand, take Planet Fitness, for example. One Planet Fitness location may, ramp up, in a couple of weeks. Others take months. Some, for whatever reason, just aren't great locations. So they're, it's all over the map. So it's really important to kind of understand that experience of franchise owners and really understand what your real capital need is here, because the worst thing to do is to run out of money. And, businesses and franchises fail every day because franchise owners run out of capital. And you don't want to be overly stretched. You want to make sure that, if things take a little bit longer, you've got some capital, or you've got a backup plan to get capital if you need it. And so, it might take $100,000 to get the doors open, but it might take another $100,000 to really, get to a point where things are humming and, and it's generating cash. And so that's critical to understand, because again, a lot of people think, well, if I run out of money, I'll just go to the bank and get money. And, the reality is that banks don't lend money to failing businesses. And again, it might be a great brand and it might be a great, business model. But, when you're, at the zero cash level and you're needing to make payroll, that's a really bad time to go to a bank for a loan. You want to make sure that you've got that cushion up front. So, if it's going to take $100,000 and, you've got $50,000 saved and you want to, do the rest in a loan, get a loan for, in a line of cap or a line of credit for, enough cushion so you'll cover that. And again, plan B, like if it does take 6 or 9 months longer than expected, make sure that you have that backup or backup sources that you can go to. You might have some friends and family or whatever it may be, but have that plan, because like I said, the worst thing to do is to buy a business, get it going, and then just run out of capital. And so we want to avoid that situation at all costs. I will pause here just for a second to grab a sip of water, and also remind you that if you have any questions, to pop them in the Q&A, and we're almost done here and we can get to as many questions as you have. All right. So onward. I know this is a lot, this financial stuff, especially. We have what we call our My Franchise Life Plan document. And life is liabilities, income, financial wealth, and equity. And so, really kind of working through those numbers is, like I said, is really important. If you're going to sign, most franchise agreements are fairly long term. They might be 10 years long. And so, what does this investment look like over 10 years? And so that's important to kind of understand. And this document will kind of walk you through that. I know you probably can't see this, it's pretty small, but it goes over things like, plugging in, what do you think your estimated sales are going to be? And what do you think your costs and things are going to be? And so again, this is where you use this document when you're talking to franchisees and you kind of verifying, what are those pieces and how do they fit into this? And again, on a conservative basis, what does this investment look like over time? And what is the value of that business over time? So, a franchisor will be able to provide you some numbers, estimated numbers as to what their typical resales are for an established business. So, that's the best part of business ownership, is at the end of the day, hopefully you have an asset that you can sell or pass on to a family member that's got some real financial value. So it's important to understand what that is and what that looks like. And, you're not going to be able to sit down and plug all these numbers in one setting, but you're going to collect bits and pieces of information from different resources, franchisor and franchisees that you talk to, and have a good understanding of how this business will ultimately work over time. The other piece that I will add, in addition to your financial education, is get a good local accountant. You can establish that relationship now and just talk to them about your plans of business ownership. And they can help you kind of work through some of these models and understand, where some of the, blind spots might be. Because again, you want to make sure you have plenty of capital and don't run out of money along the way. But again, what does this look like year 3, year 4, year 5, and how much money do you have to put back in the business to keep it going? And if you're going to open additional locations, how does that impact your cash flow or your additional investment needed? And so, yeah, it's important to kind of do that exercise. I will caution you too, is I talk to a lot of people that are like, yeah, I want to be a multi-unit franchisee, and I'm going to buy a pizza shop, and 6 months later I'm going to open another one, and by year 5 I'm going to have 10. And that's a great plan, but what often happens is they get into location 1 and that business doesn't necessarily kick off enough cash flow to open location number 2 and also support their lifestyle if they're taking out a salary. So it's important to kind of understand, what are your personal income needs? What are the income needs of the business? And, if you are planning to do multi-unit franchising, what does that big picture capital need look like? Because it can be significant. And I know a lot of people that, assume they're going to own 5 or 10 businesses, and they never get past one, and, and that one may be struggling to, even kick out any profit. So again, get together with, local bankers, local accountants, go to some local community networking events, Better Business Bureau in your area, or, Chamber of Commerce events, those sorts of things. And those are great places to meet people like this, to, kind of share your goals and sit down with them to kind of work through some of your numbers as you go. And then, the last step in this whole process, obviously, is the decision. And as I said earlier, some of you will, start to explore and just be like, whoa, franchising isn't the right fit for me, and decide to do something else. And that's fine. Again, we want people coming into franchising that are excited and passionate about what they're getting into, and know it's going to be a lot of hard work. And hopefully that hard work will pay off with some good success over time. You may also be, in the middle and be like, yeah, I want to, I'm still passionate about business ownership, but, I don't know about this opportunity. And so, if you're finding that, that's, one of 2 things. One is, I would say just keep looking for a bit. Most candidates, entrepreneurs look for well over a year before they find a business that they invest in. You may feel pressure along the way from franchise companies being like, come on, let's make a decision. We're the perfect for you. And, if you're getting that kind of hard sell from folks, I always say that's a red flag. They should be professional and persistent. And it should feel like a recruitment process. They should be asking you just as many questions as you're asking them. And I think that's just common sense. We all know when that bad feeling of being sold to, and when someone's being overly aggressive. And if that's happening with whatever brand you're exploring, definitely walk away. It's probably a red flag that they're overselling and under delivering. So make sure that you feel like you're, there's an exchange of information. They're trying to learn as much about you because they want you to be successful and want to make sure you're a good fit for their brand, just as you're trying to learn information from them. So, keep looking. And then, I guess the flip side of that is, if you've been looking and looking and looking for a long time and have never made a decision, and, business ownership may not be the right fit for you. Business owners, successful business owners, do have to be fairly decisive. And so, if you're that kind of person that really needs to think things through for a long period of time and, you kind of hem and haw, that main franchising and business ownership may not be the right fit for you. So in that case, you may want to look at, other opportunities to invest your money in. The other piece before we open it up for questions that I'll just add is, what's always bothered me is there's so many people that get into franchising every year. And for the most part, they go through this business or this process completely alone. There are, as I mentioned earlier, Rick Bizio is a business broker, and there are franchise brokers out there that work with individuals, but, usually that's one-on-one. And so we ended up coming up with the idea of why not start franchise buyer groups where people can kind of, learn from each other and, us and other franchise experts along the way. So I would like to invite you, and again, this will be in the follow-up email after the webinar. If you're interested and, you're serious about buying a business, our buyer groups, it is a paid service. So it's $99 a month, unlimited, so like you can join for a month if you want to join for, a year or whatever, like it's a monthly fee. And the idea is that we meet every 2 weeks and listen to other entrepreneurs that are looking at buying franchises, learn from each other. We'll have different experts on: franchisees, franchisors, lawyers, that sort of thing. And I just realized that I didn't plug attorneys. As part of your research, I definitely recommend getting a good franchise attorney on your team to help you evaluate the opportunity, look at the franchise agreement and explain all the details in there. Don't try and save money and, use a friend who might be a local attorney. You want a good franchise attorney. And if you're at that stage where you need one, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to provide some names. There's lots of good people out there that will typically work with candidates over the phone. It'll cost you a few $1,000, but it'll be money well spent. So I always tell people, don't sign a franchise agreement without having a good franchise attorney on your team review the document and explain all the details that are in there. Because they're, very thick legal documents and lots of legal jargon that most people don't have any clue, including a lot of attorneys, what's actually in there. So with that, what I will do is open it up for questions. And I know Stacy on our team here is out there somewhere, I think.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. We do have a couple questions. One question that came in is, do you have a list of franchises that do well financially and offer great support to the franchisees?
Yeah, great question. So we certainly do. I mean, it's kind of a tricky question because everybody's financial expectations are different. Some people, they are happy, if they can make 65, 70,000, 50,000, whatever it may be a year. Some of you may be, you might be in jobs now where you're making $150,000, $200,000 a year, and you want to make more than that. So, financial expectations are obviously come in all different shapes and sizes. But on our website, we do a lot of analysis of the brands that we survey. And like I said, all the brands that are promoted on our site have gone through our survey process and have been found to have great satisfaction. But in addition to that, we also have a most profitable franchise list and a recession-proof franchise list based on brands that we've seen that, tend to have higher average income for their franchisees, as well as performed well during down market times. Brands that survived COVID well, brands that survived the Great Recession well. And just on that note, when you're looking at a franchise disclosure document, one important item in there, so I don't want to turn this into a FDD discussion too much, but item 20 shows all their franchise units, a count of all their franchise units. And what you'll see is, how many they have at the beginning of the year, how many new ones they opened, how many may have closed, terminated, that sort of thing. And then at the end of the year, how many they have. And so you want to see, kind of a ideally steady growth in a franchise brand. And, it doesn't have to be explosive growth necessarily. Some brands do grow, they add 50 or 100 units in a year, and, which is a lot. Especially bigger brands, you talk about, a brand like Subway, who's got thousands and thousands of units, a few hundred units a year is nothing for them. But most smaller franchise brands will be growing at, maybe 10-15% a year. What you don't want to see is churn. And so if you look at that item 20 and you see, just as many people exiting the system as they are entering the system, that's definitely a red flag. And that's something that we look at too as part of our analysis. Is, some turnover is kind of normal, 5-10% is kind of normal, because you've got franchisees that are selling their business, retiring, or getting out of the business for other reasons. But if their churn is much more than 15-20% a year, that's definitely a red flag. And so I will caution you, there's brands out there, not on our list, but there are brands out there that have 30-40% turnover year over year. And so that's an important thing to look at. And they may be good at selling franchises, but not as good at supporting franchises. So check out our overall top 200 list, check out our recession proof list and our most profitable list. And again, the caveat maybe is that there's businesses out there that are very profitable, but they may be a higher investment range that's outside of your comfort zone, or your the capital that you have. So don't necessarily stretch yourself thin to invest in a brand where you think you can be more successful ultimately and build more money if you're going to be undercapitalized to begin with. So that's important to make sure that you have that capital, and talk to the franchisors about their relationships with banks. Some of them do provide or at least connect you with third-party lending, so that you can get financing. Obviously, it's similar to buying a house. Just because the investment is a couple $100,000 or maybe more, you don't have to put all that money down up front. So you have to generally, again, it's all over the map, but generally speaking, you're going to have to bring 25-30% capital to the table in order to finance some of the rest. And some franchise systems, not many, but some do internal financing as well. So it's important to kind of ask those questions and find out, what's the cash requirement? I get, okay, this business is $100,000 initial investment. Maybe I need 30 to get in and I can finance the rest. And then, as I said earlier, what does that long-term reinvestment look like? And hopefully you can do that mostly through the cash flow of the business, but that will obviously have some impact on the money you can also take out of the business as well. So good question.
We have a few other questions in here in the queue. Do franchisors provide the FDD disclosure document to anyone who asks at any stage in the process?
Yeah, good question. So they're legally required to provide it if they're having, significant significant discussions with you about investing in their franchise. It used to be, the rule used to be the first face-to-face meeting, and now, there's so many Zoom meetings and everything else that it's usually provided much before the first face-to-face meeting. But some franchise systems will give it out very quickly. Others will kind of hold it back a little bit because they don't want to just give it to everybody that asks. They'll wait. And there is a legal process there. They have to, when they send you a franchise disclosure document, you have to sign that you received it, and they have to keep record of that from a legal standpoint. So that's why they generally don't just give them out to everybody. And there are some websites online, some state registration websites Wisconsin is one, Minnesota is one, California is one, that has a directory of franchise companies that are at least registered in those states. They won't have every franchise disclosure document, but if they're operating in that state, they will. So that those can be a great resource to find a document as well. But I generally encourage you, like, if you're interested in a brand, inquire to the company either through our site or them directly, and they'll give you the franchise disclosure document within the first few conversations.
We have another question about franchise disclosure. Would it be a conflict of interest if I reached out to a franchise attorney who happens to have done the FDD for the franchise I'm looking at?
Yes. Great question. Was that asked by an attorney in the audience? That's what I want to know. So let me clarify on the attorney thing. So, there's exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, the attorneys in the franchise industry either represent franchise companies or they represent franchisees. And, some do cross over and do both. They are legally obligated, in that case, if it was an attorney that wrote the financial or the franchise agreement, they're obligated to disclose that. And, certainly most would. But generally speaking, you want to find a franchisee attorney, because that's what they specialize in. They understand the ins and outs of the franchise agreement, and franchise agreements are written very one-sided towards the franchisor. Obviously, they want to protect their brand and have a lot of control, which is understandable. But you need to understand, as a prospective franchisee, what do those obligations actually mean? In worst case scenario, things happen. What is that? How does that potentially impact you long term? Because again, you're signing, in many cases, a multi-year agreement, and you can't just 6 months in decide, I don't want to do this anymore, because the franchisor in many cases can come back and sue you for damaging their brand by opening a location or opening a business and then walking away. So it's important to kind of understand all the details that are in that franchise agreement, and how they affect you, and just understand that those agreements are, they are one-sided towards the franchisor, and generally speaking, they're non-negotiable. And that's because, obviously a franchise company is signing agreements with lots and lots of other franchisees. They can't negotiate each one, and nor do they want to. So they keep it standard. And so that's why it's important to have a franchise attorney go through it with you, and they will explain what's in there, but they're not going to come back. If you go to your Uncle Bob, who's a, divorce attorney, he'll go through it and, mark up, no offense to divorce attorneys, but he'll go through it and mark it up, and say, oh, you got to change this, you got to change this, you got to change this, and send a red line back to the franchise, and they'll just be like, no, sorry. So again, it's important to have a good franchisee attorney on your team, to kind of help you through that process. And anybody that wants a recommendation, my email's up on the screen. Just shoot me an email at eric@franchisebusinessreview.com, and I'm happy to send you a few recommendations. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, but one more question if we have it.
We had a couple of questions come in regarding territories, so I'll combine them. Do you have input about franchisors that have territory boundaries, and is it risky to open a franchise when another is opening within 20 miles of your potential territory?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. And it's hard to answer generally without knowing the details of the brand. But most franchise companies have some sort of protected territories. It may be geographical, it may be mileage based, it might be zip code based, it might be population based. There's lots of different kind of ways they define those territories. And, having other locations around you or if it's not a location, it might be a service brand, having other franchisees around you, I see as a good thing, because it means, the brand's got good coverage in the market, and that's going to help you from a marketing standpoint. Consumers are going to know your brand. If you're the only one, for miles and miles and miles around, it's actually a disadvantage. Certainly, you can run into situations with encroachment, depending if you've got a really small territory. 20 miles, again, I don't know what the business is, but 20 miles is like infinite in most situations. I know some franchisors, have territory limitations as small as a mile, or even a few blocks, depending on, if you're in a city, they can change that if it's a metro area. But again, I view that more as, more locations hopefully rises the tide for all boats, because you do have now mass coverage and mass exposure to the full consumer audience, and you can get together and do marketing together, and hopefully all of those operators are good operators. And again, going back to the franchise agreement and why franchisors are so particular is that having a bad franchisee, a bad operator, is damaging to the brand as a whole, but also potentially your business. So if a franchisee and you're an XYZ brand is operating down the street or down the block or even miles away, and they keep their store a mess or their service is terrible, that could impact your business. So you want a good franchisor that's going to enforce standards. You are going to keep your business up to snuff, and you want them to be able to enforce those standards across the whole system. And again, I think that's the beauty of the franchise model. Some people think it's a little too restrictive, but it's important for the success of the business as a whole. So hopefully that answers the question. Again, I know we're at the top of the hour, so I want to respect everybody's time. Any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email at eric@franchisebusinessreview.com. If you're interested in our franchise buyers groups, let me know. We'll get you into those. We've got one forming here shortly. Hopefully, this has been helpful and you make a good choice. And, again, any questions that come up along the way, feel free to reach out and we'll help you get the answer that you need. And I wish you the best of success and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thanks for coming. And thanks, Stacy, for answering or asking all the questions.
Thanks, everyone. Happy franchising.